So what? So what happens after we leave the liturgy? That credible, incredible, inscrutable liturgy of word and sacrament. Well, it's interesting that in the New Testament, Paul uses the word liturgy, the Greek word liturgia, in several places, but never in response to what's going on in church. Paul uses the word liturgia in its various forms, verb forms, liturgists, liturgy, the same way that the ancient Greeks used the word. A liturgia was a service that citizens of Greece, leading citizens, and then citizens of the Roman Empire, they didn't have to pay income taxes, these wealthy people, but their liturgy was to make contributions for public service projects. There was need for water in a town, so the liturgy of a wealthy person would be to contribute money to build an aqueduct. That's the way Paul used the word. Not for what went on in church, but for the so what as to what happened afterward. Let me give you a couple cases. The word liturgia. It means work of the people. Light, we get laity. Ergos, we get the word work. Ergonomics. The work of the people. What is the work of the people when we leave the liturgy? Well, in Romans 15, verse 27, Paul's talking about the Macedonians and the Achaeans, Christians, who have just made wonderful contributions. And Paul says, "For if the Gentiles have come to share in the Jewish people's spiritual blessings, they ought to be of service," Paul uses the word liturgia, "to them in material things." He speaks of their financial contributions as their liturgy. And the Gentiles, the Macedonian and Achaean Gentiles, the Christians, are making a liturgical act by giving money to support the poor. And it's not an accident in 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the passage that is, "The Lord loves a cheerful giver." You've heard that one. He goes on in verses 11 to 12 to say this about financial contributions: "For you will be enriched in every way for great generosity, which through us will produce thanksgiving," that's the Greek word Eucharist, "to God for the rendering of this service." Liturgia, this financial contribution, your liturgy, not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows in many thanksgivings to God. Look at that, the two commandments. You take care of the neighbor and flow in loving God with many thanksgivings. That's what financial contributions do. That's a stewardship statement if I ever heard one. And here's an interesting thing, I didn't point this out. For the rendering of this service, the Greek word rendering here is where we get the word diaconate, the diaconia of this liturgy. Results not only in supplying the needs of the saints, but in many thanksgivings to God. You shall love your neighbor as yourself, and that demonstrates love of the Lord your God. It's not only financial contributions, though. Paul uses the word liturgy in another way in his epistle to the Philippians, where he's thanking them for Epaphroditus. There's a word that you run into every day, Epaphroditus. He says, "My brother and co-worker and fellow soldier, your messenger and minister," it's the Greek word liturgos, liturgist, "to my need. He risked his life to make up for those services, liturgies, that you could not give me in person." So a liturgy is also the care we give to people in need. Paul was in prison when he wrote this. They sent Epaphroditus to care for his needs in prison. Liturgy, so what? Is how we care for people in need after we have been cared for by the liturgy of word and sacrament. My job, said Aidan, is to be a kid. Our job is to be God's children in the world. So who is this neighbor now that we need to serve? Somebody was crazy enough to ask Jesus that question too. And who is my neighbor? You remember it. It happens in Luke's gospel. And Luke told the story of the parable of the Good Samaritan as Jesus' response to the question, and who is my neighbor? The Good Samaritan was the one that nobody liked. The Good Samaritan was one that couldn't even come to church in Jerusalem. The Good Samaritan was one who was despised because he went to church elsewhere, had a different culture, and just didn't fit. He wasn't one of our kind. And when Jesus got done with the story, he switched the whole question. It was no matter of who is my neighbor, but Jesus actually twisted it to mean, to whom can I be a neighbor? Which one proved to be the neighbor? And of course it was the Samaritan, and Jesus' command was, go then and do likewise. My job is to be a kid. Our job is to go and do likewise, prove to be neighbors to people in need. And who are our neighbors in need? Well, they are the people that we encounter day in and day out. Our families are our closest neighbors. Our friends, and actually the people who live next door, are our closest neighbors. Our neighbor is the checkout person at the grocery store. Our person is the one who receives your toll at the toll booth as you drive through if you don't have Easy Pass. Our neighbor is the reception at the doctor's office, the one that makes you wait for 4 hours. And then there are neighbors we never see. There are, at the present time, over 6 billion neighbors. Out of the 6 billion neighbors, there are 4 billion of them who live on less than $2 a day. Imagine that. Actually, it breaks down like this. 1.3 billion people live on less than $1 a day. Another 2.7 billion struggle on less than $2 a day. Globally, 200 million are unemployed, and that's probably worse since the last 6 months. Millions more are underemployed and don't have enough work or income to support their families. Who are our neighbors? What does it mean to be a neighbor? How long can you hold your breath?